as we turn our attention to what we want to see the Giants accomplish on day 2, it does directly then turn into the offensive side of the ball for me in one of 2 areas. Obviously, wide receiver, we still want to see that weapon get added here. I think we both agree on that. Shockingly enough, man, I hate to feel like I'm having the Amon-Ra St. Brown deja vu all over again here. But if you want to know who the next top on the ESPN big board wide receiver is, it's Jonathan Mingo out of Ole Miss. And I don't know if he's going to get there for the Giants down at 57. Then we also think about inside offensive line. We still have Tippmann, who I talked about, the center. Also Schmitz, who everyone had talked about as potentially being a first-round selection. We can talk about where we want the Giants to go, but I'm going to go ahead and assert, like, in some ways, like, you could make the case that if you want to address either one of those 2 areas, it might require the move up the board here for Joe Schoen from 57.
Yeah, especially because you're mentioning this is, the early in the second round is now where a lot of the wide receivers and interior offensive linemen were kind of slated and scheduled to go.
Yeah.
You mentioned Mingo
Mingo.
as one of the guys before who's potentially going to go, still one of the top guys on the board. He's
9th highest on the
obviously,
board overall right now, by the way.
yeah, 6'2", 220 pounds. Like, you've liked
Perfect.
him throughout this entire process. He's moved up from potentially being a 4th round pick all the way into the second. One of the other things that I'm hearing is the Giants brought a couple of guys in for top 30 visits.
Yep.
One of them was Oklahoma wide receiver Marvin Mims. A lot of the beat writers are saying the Giants really, really like him. He's a guy that's explosive. When you get the ball in his hands, he can break it for a touchdown. He has 4.38 speed. He's another guy that fits the mold of what the Giants are looking to do offensively. When the beat writers are telling you, like, be on the lookout for Marvin, Mims to be one of the guys the Giants circle, you best believe that they have talked to someone that's like, if he's there by the time we draft, we are probably going to take him. I think he's one of those people, if the Giants stand pat, that might still be there for them, late in the second round.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because we talk about the offseason. Paris, you obviously bring in Paris Campbell, you bring in, bring in Crowder, and we know the contracts and how the offseason plays out. Got Sterling Shepard trying to come back. We hope Robinson's going to be healthy. There's so many factors there. But I do find it interesting. That's 5'11", 183 for Mims. It does kind of fit the mold of these guys that they want. And then you think about what else the Giants have had on the outside, retaining Darius Slayton. I do have this question when we think about addressing wide receiver of which of these players that are on the current Giants roster are viewed as Band-Aids or, viewed as the surgery that fixed the wound, right? Because depending on how you look at that, does dictate what the Giants would want to do, whether it's a Tillman out of Tennessee potentially, who has that really, really big size and big bodied guy. But, you mentioned Mims. He is, as of right now, the 60th overall on the board, 5th best remaining wide receiver, just behind Tillman, Hyatt out of Tennessee as well. If you want to go in that vein, then Tillman might be a viable option for them. 6 foot, 176, same kind of mold. Jaden Reed out of Michigan State, also there on the board for the Giants at the wide receiver position. Oddly enough, remember once upon a time, Josh Downs from North Carolina? He's the 6th remaining wide receiver on ESPN, 63 overall. He was once being talked about in and around the Zay Flowers in the first round conversation. So is that based on combine and just dropping down a little bit? Is someone going to get a real steal of a value? It is interesting to me. And then, by the way, Nathaniel Dell as well. You want to get quick and shifty. Why don't you go with the kid out of Houston that's an absolute pinball on the field and can impact it in a lot of different areas? I
have a question for you.
Yeah,
Adam.
go ahead. Yeah.
I have a very interesting question. So we missed on the first round graded wide receivers. Joe Schoen kind of admitted that the run left us high and dry in terms of being able to look at one of them. Now we're talking about the second round, and we talked about some of the different wide receivers, Mims. We've talked about Tillman, others that are available. Do you think the Giants are looking at it now in round 2 saying, we just got to improve the wide receiver room and draft any wide receiver? Do you that's the first question. The second question is, do you think if they look at it and say, well, how much better are these guys than Wan'Dale Robinson, Isaiah Hodgins, et cetera, and that overall maybe a guard or a center in the second round actually makes our team better overall, even though we still know we need a wide receiver number 1?
Yeah. So again, this isn't just because he's my guy, but to me, with all the measurables, going and watching his highlights, seeing him at the combine, Jonathan Mingo to me feels like a very much above the rest of this group here. He's 37th overall on ESPN's big board right now. I said he's up there in the top 9th highest ranked player currently left on the board. But to your point now, so do I think if I look at him, I say, I think that he is. He comes in and he ends up being one of the day one starters and contributors for you, right? He comes in and takes over for Darius Slayton, a guy that you're bringing back to make sure you have a safety net, but is very much gettable, right? Paris Campbell, good player, veteran, injury history. Like Mingo to me is the guy you want to go get. Hyatt, some of these other players, Dell, I can make strong cases why, yeah, they'd be nice. I can make a very strong case why Nathaniel Dell. It's like, that's like having a Wan'Dale Robinson, and who knows what's going to happen with that, right? So there's that version of it. Then the question becomes, do you go get him? Because if you're starting at 33, 9 picks later, you're at 41. You have a ways to go unless Mingo were to start to fall or any of these wide receivers. So to your point, I would go get him. That's me. And then I would see how things shake out, and I would look to get one of these quality offensive linemen. But knowing that the Giants haven't added to that interior, I think you and I both agree that that is as critical an area. And you can make the case, no matter how much I may love Jonathan Mingo, Paris Campbell, Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins, Wan'Dale Robinson, Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley, all of their games are helped if you make the offensive line stronger in front of them. The question is, are these offensive linemen, these interior players, are they head and shoulders above guys that you would get at 89 or maybe slightly above that if you make a marginal move? It's tricky to me. And this is where I'll put it this way. I think the Giants should move up. And I think it's just a matter of what you're moving up for. But I think the talent is there. It's just a question of what do you think is more critical right now?
Yeah, I keep going through it in my brain because I said if we don't walk away with a wide receiver in the first 2 rounds, I'm going to feel like this was a disappointment. And now we sit here and I'm thinking to myself, okay, with this run,
How
like,
do I make this so it's not a disappointment?
well, because it's like, okay, so we're there and Jalen Hyatt's available, and you're like, wow, that's great. And the question is like the upgrade of Jalen Hyatt over Darius Slayton, is it as big of an upgrade as someone like John Michael Schmitz would be over
Yep.
Ben Bredesen
Yep.
or Joe Tippmann over Shane Lemieux? It's like, which one gives the offense just overall a better ability to score points? And like knowing that Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith and Davis last year from the Eagles and Fletcher Cox are all there. It's like, do we need another wide receiver that might just be slightly better than Slayton or Shepard if he's healthy? Or do we need to actually go get an interior offensive lineman that could stop those people from getting to Daniel Jones? I'm starting to now get really, really worried and think like maybe we got to go get a center at this point.
So let's close out on this before we say what we want, hope the Giants will do. A couple of predictions here. And Tippmann, by the way, he's 40th. Schmitz is right there behind him. So again, will those players fall, or is this now when the talent pool gets targeted? Remember, Will Levis still there, Hayden Hooker still there. So there's quarterbacks, there's some movement that could happen there. And who are teams that went wide receiver there in the first round? 4 teams that aren't necessarily going to be looking for that position going forward here on day 2. My thing would be, though, and we talked about this leading up to the draft and in the offseason about targets for the Giants. Don't forget, there's a veteran, former New York Jets center still out there on the market. And I think one thing that if you're Joe Schoen, you need to be assessing is how would we improve these positions, if not in the first 1, 2, or 3 rounds in our top 100 picks? Do we feel more confident about going and adding a wide receiver if we think we need that, or about going and adding an offensive lineman? And again, I don't know if the fan base is ecstatic about the moves that were made in the wide receiver room this offseason. None of them are, groundbreakers, but the collection of talent is good. It's better than it was last year. It should be more consistent than it was potentially last year. So that to me is that's the real question here. My only tip seems like Joe Schoen said the run on wide receivers. There wasn't a chance for us to do it. We couldn't go make that move if we wanted to. So clearly they wanted to do it, right? And it just comes down to what is that talent gap there and where did they have these interior offensive linemen? And you mentioned guard as well with Shane Lemieux. Don't forget, they just drafted, though, a couple rounds later, a left guard as well that's going to be competing in this regime. So I look at it right now as within 57, 89, I want a center. Like, that's what I want. I want it. So it really just comes down to, do you think there's one that you can get back there or make moves around the board? Where do you ultimately, we'll get out on this, where do you see this team going at 57 and at 89? And do you think they're going to try to move up the board here and use some of that later draft capital and just say, hey, man, we want 3-4 quality guys in the first 4 rounds that we can add in and fill specific needs?
Oh, Great question. I
Super
think
easy.
that the Giants are looking at Marvin Mims, Oklahoma wide receiver. It just feels like he's the guy that they're kind of circling on, just knowing that he fits like the short, quick burst, get it in his hands, can take it to the house, would improve the wide receiver room. But you look at Dallas's front seven, you look at what the Eagles just did in the draft, and you sit here and say, how long can we keep this offensive line being makeshift in the interior before it becomes a serious problem? The Giants haven't gone out and done anything. We talk Connor McGovern just signed with the Jets just a handful of days ago, was one of the last big centers that was
Yes.
still on the free agent
I
market.
was referencing him in a way as if he still existed, but
Well, yeah, the deal came out. I think he's. I don't know if they detailed how much money he was making, but some of these centers are signing for 6, 8, 10 million a year. That the Giants maybe don't have that luxury right now. I think they go with Mims. I think that's my guess. My fallback would be A.T. Perry from Wake Forest in the third round
yeah,
would be a good
like
one
him.
if you do want to go get your center. But yeah, I mean, at this point, we've addressed cornerback. To me, it's got to be an interior offensive lineman and a wide receiver, no matter how you want to dice or splice it in the second and the third rounds.
When you start to get into it here, guys like Osiris Torrance, he'll be there. We're talking about, I'm looking anywhere from starting 10, 12 picks back into the second round. Players like BJ Ojolari, brother of Aziz Ojolari, is in that mix there. And I do wonder, and I'm throwing out some non-wide receiver offensive lineman names just to say, hey, remember, if you can't make those trades up and you just have to sit there and wait, this is where you'd be living in. Jaden Reed, Schmitz could be there, but I assume someone else is going to make the move for him. Jalen Hyatt, wide receiver, will be there. And then you look at some other interior linebackers like Simpson out of Clemson. So it does become fascinating to your point about you want to address these areas. It's just a matter of who falls there and when you can make those selections. Just on Marvin Mims, as you highlighted, out of Oklahoma, he's 60th overall. Cedric Tillman, 59th overall. So it's like you can sit there and kind of dream on one of these guys should be there for you, certainly. I have mentioned him before. Iacivas out of Princeton. He's a much later pick. You're talking in the 180s and 200s, and maybe you'll take him a little bit sooner. A raw talent. And I think maybe that's the caveat of if the Giants don't think they can get that other weapon here early, do they just say push the pause and let's continue to add talent? Because we still know linebacker room can still use another body. The secondary, in theory, maybe could use another body, but the hierarchy is here. Interior offensive lineman, wide receiver, and we'll have more conversations about this over on Twitter, just talking about some guys, especially at 89, I think. It'll be fun to start to look into that realm and think about, well, if we go inside, offensive line, how do we get a wide receiver or vice versa? And I just, listen, man, weapons on either side of the ball is going to be the key for me. I like what they did in round one with Deontay Banks. Now I am very curious, what model of player do they go after here on day two?
Last name to think about, just because of the connection, Luke Weipler of Ohio State is regarded as the second or third, usually the third best center. Adam from Montville, New Jersey. He's a local guy. Could you not see the Giants looking at him late second round, early in the third, and saying, "Let's go grab our center here"? Has familiarity, with New Jersey. We'd be curious to find out if he grew up a Giants fan, because that would just be the little tip of the cap that all we need, right?
Oh, yeah, listen, anytime you can get a local connection, it always works. And I'll throw these names out just as we go here that aren't wide receiver. I had mentioned Overshorn out of Texas previously in some of my looks here. I'll also mention Marte Mapu, played safety and is also going to be transitioning into inside linebacker, most likely at the NFL level. 6'3", 217, very athletic, very versatile. 89, 98 on the big board, respectively. Like, this is where I think it'll be interesting, specifically when we get to that 89th pick for the Giants. Best player available and fit and need, all of those things can collide where, gosh, we all think that center, we all think that it's so important. And all of a sudden we'll be sitting here saying, I wonder what the round four looks like for some of these. And then we'll really start to talk about veterans on the market. That being the case, guys, it was a really good one. A little insight here. I was at the Devils playoff game on opening draft night for the New York Football Giants. I had a blast at that, watching Akira Schmid, rookie goaltender, pitch a shutout against the Rangers and Shesterkin to take a 3-2 lead in that series. But now it's Friday night. This is a lot of times where your team truly gets built. I cannot wait for draft coverage to kick off. I know Andy, who took a respite, had a little vacay, and then now is dialed in.
You know what? Order yourself some wings, treat yourself, sit down on the couch, and now get a couple rounds of drafting for the Giants. These are almost as important as that round 1 pick, Adam. And you get 2 for the price of 1 tonight. Tune in. Excited to see what the Giants do next to fill some of these areas they need.
Guys, we said it. It's just the way that things broke. This was not nearly as in-depth as we wanted to be leading up to the draft, but guess what? We will be in-depth coming out of the draft. You get us over on YouTube, obviously at One Giant Podcast. You get us on Twitter at AndyMac214, at Adam Armbrecht, at One Giant Podcast. We're going to be breaking down how these players fit in, how they improve this team, and then ultimately how Big Blue stacks up in the NFC East as we move through the draft. Until next time, though. For the first time in a long time, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.
Yeah. I'll just cut this here since it's about 4:15.